never expected how quickly everything would change. Our house was beautiful, nestled in the quiet, sleepy town of Griffin, Georgia. Sheila, my wife, worked as an accountant while I worked as an IT consultant. Most days, I'd work from home, only occasionally leaving for business trips, even as far as Europe, helping companies with computer security. Life was good and comfortable. A nice house, stable jobs, everything seemed perfect. Looking back, I realize now that Sheila started acting differently. She became distant, snappy. She had once been an avid runner, but her daily jogs turned to twice a week, and eventually once a week. She seemed off, like there was something heavy weighing on her. But it wasn't until one Saturday morning as we ate breakfast that I truly understood why. She looked worried, her eyes cast downward, avoiding my gaze. I could feel something was coming, something she was afraid to say. I thought maybe it was about us. Maybe she was unhappy with our life, with me. But I was wrong. So wrong. 2 months ago, she began, her voice shaky, I found a lump in my right breast. And at the end of the week, the doctor called me in. He said the tests showed breast cancer. My heart froze. I couldn't breathe. She went on, it spread to my lymph nodes. The doctors say it's really serious. They said I might only have a year, maybe a year and a half, to live. The room seemed to close in on me. I didn't know what to say. We just sat there in silence, the weight of her words crushing us both. As the days passed, Sheila's health rapidly declined. I stayed by her side, caring for her with the help of some kind-hearted nurses. But despite everything, there was nothing anyone could do. One night, I woke up to find she had passed in her sleep, peacefully, but still it tore me apart. I held a funeral for her, made all the necessary arrangements, but I couldn't escape the grief. It consumed me. Eventually, after 6 months of drowning in sorrow, I decided I needed a fresh start. I couldn't stay in the house where every corner reminded me of Sheila. So I sold the house and moved to Florida, hoping the change would help me heal. The new house was perfect. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a yard with an acre of land just outside Griffin. I figured it would be a new chapter, a place to rebuild. But I couldn't bring myself to let go of Sheila's things. Even after all this time, her clothes, her books, everything she left behind, I couldn't part with them. I promised myself that once I settled in, I would sort through her belongings, find new homes for them. But that was a promise I never kept. Moving in was a relief. It went smoothly, surprisingly so, but the house and garage were filled with boxes. It was chaotic, and I still hadn't sorted everything. One big issue on moving day was that I forgot to get curtains, but the previous owner had left some behind, which I was thankful for. The first week in the house was peaceful enough. I had taken 2 weeks off to organize things, but by the second week, strange things started to happen. It was a Monday morning, and I had just finished my cereal. I stood up to leave the kitchen and noticed a package at the door. I signed for it, closed the door, and returned to the kitchen. That's when I saw it. The drawers. Every single one was halfway pulled out. I couldn't believe it. I checked the back door, the windows, everything, but there was no sign of anyone breaking in. I thought maybe I had forgotten to close them properly the night before, so I pushed them all back in place and went about my day. But a nagging unease followed me. Later, I went into Griffin to buy groceries, then returned home and put everything away. I decided to relax by the pool, a much-needed break after all the unpacking. When I went upstairs to grab my swimming trunks, I noticed something odd. My bedroom door felt stuck. I hadn't had any trouble with it before. I pushed hard on the handle, and suddenly the door flew open, and I stumbled to the floor. I shook it off and tried again. Downstairs, I made my way to the pool. As I walked across the lawn, I noticed something strange. Water near the shallow end of the pool, as if someone had just been swimming. But there was no one around. I got into the pool trying to relax, but something wasn't right. The thought of the drawers being pulled out and the water, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that someone or something was there. As I swam, I started to feel it, ripples in the water moving without explanation. I turned around, expecting to see someone behind me, but there was no one. The ripples slowly faded away as if they had never been there. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered. When I got out of the pool to grab my towel, I found it had been moved, wet, as if someone had used it. I stared in disbelief. No one had been in sight. Then, as I looked back at the pool, my heart stopped. At the far end, near the deep end, I saw something. A figure, a small child, floating eerily still. Panic surged through me, and I dove into the water, swimming toward the child. But as I neared, the figure blurred, like a mirage. It looked like a boy, maybe 10 years old. Then the image vanished, and I came up for air, coughing and gasping. I searched frantically, but there was no one. I climbed out of the pool, drenched and confused. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. Maybe the grief was getting to me. I sat on a pool chair, trying to calm myself, but then I heard it. A voice. I shot up, heart racing. I looked around, but there was no one. The voice had come from the end of the garden. There, near the shed, I saw a pile of logs. I wrapped myself in a bathrobe and walked toward it, the voice still echoing in my mind. As I got closer, I noticed something. New grass, fresh and vibrant, surrounded by tall weeds and overgrown bushes. It didn't belong there, like someone had planted it to hide something. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a spade from the shed and returned to the patch of strange grass. Hesitation gripped me. What was I doing? But I couldn't stop myself. I dug, slowly, carefully, until I hit something. It was soft, like fabric. I pulled the dirt away, revealing a rolled-up carpet tied with cables. My hands shook as I lifted it, and when the carpet unraveled, my stomach churned. A decayed arm, half exposed. I stepped back, my breath catching in my throat. I peeled away more of the carpet. A shoe, a leg, bones. I rushed inside, terrified, and called 911. Within minutes, the sheriff arrived, and a crime investigation team started their work. After a thorough search, they confirmed it, the body of a child, around 10 years old. They found traces of chlorine on the decaying clothes. The boy had drowned, or so they thought. Maybe he had fallen into the pool by accident, or perhaps someone had pushed him. They were puzzled by why I had dug in that spot on that day, but I made up a story, not wanting to mention the voice I had heard. The police spoke to the previous owner and his family, but they found nothing unusual. After that day, nothing strange happened in the house. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That voice, that figure in the pool. I didn't want to stay in the house any longer, but I had nowhere else to go. Every night I lie awake, listening to the silence, haunted by the memories of what I uncovered. The house no longer feels like home. It feels like a prison, haunted by the past. When you reach a certain age, dreams of tranquility take root. For me and my husband Dave, that dream took the form of a modest villa on the idyllic island of Mallorca. We envisioned quiet mornings by the sea, balmy evenings with fresh fruit and good wine, and the warm embrace of the Mediterranean sun. But the house we chose, and the neighbors we encountered, would unravel our plans and plunge us into something far more sinister. Dave and I had been saving for years to afford a second home. Mallorca seemed perfectly affordable, peaceful, and not too far from our lives in the UK. Our budget wasn't extravagant, but it was enough to aim for something comfortable. Our first trip to Mallorca in early 2017 was a letdown. The homes we toured were either dilapidated or far beyond our means. Discouraged but undeterred, we returned a month later. This time we stumbled upon a 2-bedroom terrace house near the main street. Small, charming, and reasonably priced, it seemed like a dream come true. The walls gleamed with a marble-like finish, the layout was simple, and it was surrounded by a vibrant community. Most importantly, it felt like it belonged to us. "This is it," Dave whispered as we toured the space. His words carried a finality that gave me chills. Within days, we secured the property, negotiating the price down to £159,000. We imagined many peaceful years ahead, Our initial stay in 2018 was blissful. The villa came furnished with old but usable pieces. Nothing fancy, but functional. We spent our days wandering the markets and soaking in the local charm. The evenings were ours to enjoy under the clear, starlit skies. But something felt off. The neighboring property was eerily silent. For a tourist-heavy area, it struck me as unusual. The terrace house next door appeared unoccupied, its windows dark and lifeless. I told myself it was nothing. Perhaps the owners were away. Our second visit came with unwelcome surprises. This time the house next door wasn't empty. From the moment we arrived, loud noises reverberated through the thin walls, shouting, banging, and what sounded like children running wild. It was chaos. "They've moved in," Dave muttered, eyeing the terrace with disdain as he adjusted his walking stick. The racket continued into the night, depriving us of sleep. By the second evening, we could no longer endure it. "We need to say something," Dave insisted. I hesitated, unsure how to approach the family. When we knocked on their door, the noise stopped instantly, plunging the street into an eerie silence. After a long pause, the door creaked open, revealing a petite woman dressed in an old-fashioned gown. She was no more than 4'10", her sharp eyes boring into us with unsettling intensity. "Yes," she said after an excruciatingly long silence. Her voice was soft but carried an edge that made my skin crawl. "We just wanted to ask if you could—" I began, but she cut me off with a curt, "Okay." Before we could respond, she slammed the door shut. After that encounter, the noise stopped completely. The once rowdy house became oppressively quiet, as if its occupants had vanished. At first, we were relieved, but as days passed, the silence began to feel unnatural. The family remained unseen. Their windows, once illuminated by warm light, were now perpetually dark. A gnawing unease settled in my chest, but Dave dismissed my concerns. "Maybe they left," he suggested. I wasn't so sure. When we returned for our third trip, the unease blossomed into dread. As we approached our villa, a strange heaviness filled the air. Something was wrong. Our front door had been forced open. Inside, every room was in disarray. Paint splattered across the walls, furniture was smashed into pieces, and the air reeked of something foul and metallic. "They've destroyed everything," I whispered, my voice trembling. But it wasn't just vandalism. Strange symbols were painted on the walls in crude, jagged lines. They looked ancient, runic almost. We reported the incident to the authorities, but they were dismissive. "Tourists," the officer said with a shrug. "Probably kids messing around." Curiously, the neighboring house was also empty. The family we had once heard and the woman we had spoken to were gone. When I asked around, locals claimed no one had rented that property in years. "It's been vacant for as long as I can remember," said the owner of a nearby cafe. "But we saw them," I insisted. "We heard them." The cafe owner gave me a strange look and said, "You must be mistaken. That house has been locked up since the last owners died. Years ago." Who were the neighbors? Were they real? And what compelled them to wreak havoc on our home before vanishing without a trace? Even now, as I recount this, I feel the chill of their eyes on me. We never sold the villa. Something about that house and the family that haunted it binds us to Mallorca in ways I cannot explain. Perhaps the lesson here is simple. When you buy a house, don't just look at the price or the location. Pay attention to the neighbors, or in our case, the ghosts of neighbors past. It was a phone call I never expected to receive. I was 32, married with 2 kids, and living a peaceful life when a man named Mr. Walker called me. He claimed to be a lawyer handling my grandparents' estate, the ones from my mother's side, the grandparents I had never met. The news was shocking. My grandpa had passed away, and my grandma, she had died years ago. The unsettling part was that I had never even seen their faces, never heard their voices, never even knew they existed until that moment. Mr. Walker explained that my mom should have inherited their house, but she was gone too. Apparently I was the last of my family, the only living heir. He mentioned that my mom had a brother, but he was dead too. There was no one left to claim it, no one left to contest it. The house was mine. I called my husband, trying to make sense of the situation. He suggested I talk to my other set of grandparents, my dad's parents, before making any decisions. I called them, but they weren't interested in the house. They barely knew my mom's side of the family. So I was left with a decision. And in that moment, the house, despite its mystery, began to feel like it might be something worth holding on to. A few weeks later, Mr. Walker offered to meet us in person. My husband and I decided it was best to see the house for ourselves before making any decisions. We left our kids with family and boarded a flight. The 6-hour trip was long, but the real surprise came when we reached the town near the house. Traffic was heavy, and by the time we arrived, night had already fallen. We met Mr. Walker at the driveway, but he seemed eager to leave. He handed us the keys and hurried off, leaving us alone with the house. As we drove up the long, winding road, I noticed how isolated it was, hidden behind thick trees and overgrown plants. The air was fresh, the night calm, but there was an uneasy quiet around the place. It felt as though the house itself was waiting for us, watching us from the shadows. My husband and I decided, instead of staying at a hotel, to stay in the house for the night. We figured we might as well explore it. The house was enormous, built with sturdy stone and wood. It looked like it could withstand anything: hurricanes, storms, even time itself. It seemed solid, unyielding, almost as if it had been waiting for someone to return. As we unlocked the front door, I felt a cold shiver creep up my spine. The air inside was thick with dust, but as I flicked on the lights, a soft yellow glow bathed the rooms in warmth. It was inviting, comfortable even, but something in the back of my mind told me to be cautious. There was a sense of something old here, something forgotten. My husband and I split up to explore. He went downstairs while I checked the upstairs. I could hear him rummaging through drawers and cabinets as he always did when we moved into a new place. But as I was going through the closet in the master bedroom, I heard a loud crash from the basement. The sound echoed throughout the house, and then silence. A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't normal. It wasn't right. A few minutes later, I heard my husband's voice calling my name. Different, urgent, almost fearful. He never used my full name unless something was wrong. I rushed downstairs, and when I reached the bottom, I found him standing under the staircase, pale and trembling. He looked terrified, his eyes wide with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, shock, disbelief. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't say anything right away. He just pointed toward the basement door, which was wide open. His lips trembled as he whispered, "I think I found a body." My heart dropped. I stared at him, not fully comprehending what he was saying. My mind raced. "What do you mean, a body?" I almost shouted, the fear rising in my throat. "Come and see," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I hesitated, my body frozen with dread, but I followed him anyway, not sure whether I wanted to see what he had found. The basement was dark, the air thick with a musty, stale smell. The only light came from the flashlight on his phone, casting eerie shadows across the cracked concrete floor. As we stepped into the basement, a sense of dread washed over me. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. My husband moved toward a large wooden box in the corner, his hands shaking as he knelt beside it. "I found something," he said, almost inaudible. "Something's buried here." He pointed to a crack in the concrete floor beneath the box. It looked like someone had tried to cover it up, but poorly. My husband grabbed a crowbar and wedged it into the gap, lifting up a slab of concrete. A foul, rancid smell hit my nostrils, making me gag, and then I saw it. My heart stopped, a part of a decayed skull half buried in the ground. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. The room spun around me. My breath came in ragged gasps as panic set in. I could barely stand. My knees buckled, but my husband caught me, pulling me upstairs as I fought to breathe. I collapsed into a chair, my head spinning. My husband went downstairs with the police when they arrived, and when they came back up, their faces were grim, full of tension. The investigation had begun. In the days that followed, the horror began to unfold. The house, which I thought would be my inheritance, became the scene of something much darker. Mr. Walker had told me my grandmother had passed away, but he hadn't mentioned that she had gone missing years earlier and was presumed dead. The truth, it seemed, was far worse. It was clear now. My grandfather had killed her and buried her in the basement. The evidence was irrefutable. But the worst part, I had never known them. I had never even met my grandmother, yet I was now tied to her death. The house was full of her ghost. I couldn't stay there any longer. The thought of spending another night in that place, surrounded by the shadows of the past, was unbearable. My husband and I made the decision to leave. The house was sold after the investigation, but the fear stayed with me. I left that place, leaving behind the memories of something darker than I could have ever imagined. But every now and then, when the wind howls through the trees at night, I can't help but wonder if my grandmother is still there, waiting for someone to remember her.